Whole food plant-based eating may bridge the gap between chronic disease prevention and the sports nutrition demands of maximal muscle hypertrophy and strength, a gap that has, until recently, been understood as separating these two domains. In today's broader segment, we examine a narrower question: are certain proteins, or more precisely, certain protein sources, associated with cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes? It is also recognized that several of these concerns are associated with a typical Western dietary pattern, where internal metabolic homeostasis may be unintentionally deprioritized. Yet it is suggested that both growth and health may be attainable together. Last week's segment touched on frequent snacking, high protein sources, and IGF-1. In terms of whole food plant-based sources, this may not be a new concept. In traditional science, whole food eating patterns, body development, and the capacity for longevity are closely tied. In this case, an important distinction should be recognized at the outset. The research drawn on for this segment does not isolate protein as a single molecule. Rather, it observes whole foods. As stated by Nguyen Schwonder and colleagues, 2023, rather than asking, is protein harmful, the question asked is, what is observed when one animal-based food is substituted for a plant-based one? The associations were consistent in direction. Substituting processed animal-based sources with whole grains was associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease, a summary hazard ratio of 0.64, with a 95% confidence interval of 0.54 to 0.75. Replacing processed animal-based sources with healthy nuts was associated with lower cardiovascular risk and with an approximately 21% lower risk of all-cause mortality. For type 2 diabetes, exchanging animal-based sources for whole grains or cereals was associated with a hazard ratio of 0.90, emphasizing that these are observational associations, graded as moderate certainty. They suggest, rather than prove, causation. What is recognized, however, is the consistency across cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and mortality. The direction of association favored the plant-based source, and taking this a step further holistically and specifically, the value of whole food plant-based sources is perhaps undeniable, where longevity is as important as building the body itself. For the athlete, this has often been understood as a trade-off: eat for performance or eat for longevity. A 2024 modeling study by Goldman and colleagues suggests this trade-off may be less fixed than assumed. Their modeling indicated that completely plant-based diets, scaled to the energy demands of resistance training, can supply sufficient protein, leucine, and essential micronutrients to maximize resistance training-induced gains in muscle mass and strength in male bodybuilders. It has been suggested that large intake levels of plant proteins, as modeled in this study, would overcome these differences and produce a comparable adaptive response to resistance exercise training. Taken alongside the substitution data and, fundamentally, the holistic traditional perspective, a coherent picture emerges. The food matrix that appears protective against chronic disease need not be the one that limits hypertrophy. The signal, then, is not protein is the problem. It is that the source is what is observed to matter. So, consider the protein source and whole food variation. Based on individual suitability and health status. Subscribe. Go deeper with holistic high-performance health.